Hello, hello, hello. I did it. Hello, everybody. So thank you for coming to the second night of the men's Bible study. I am Shane Helm. I am not leading this particular week, but I was asked to give my testimony about a time that I had to persevere. And so first of all, I just want to open in a word of prayer, and then I'll get right into it. So Heavenly Father, thank you for the group of men that have shown up today, and God, we just ask that you bless the ones that couldn't make it as well. But as we sit here and we read through Nehemiah and we listen to Chad, God, we just ask that you would put something new in our hearts that wasn't there before, or encourage us and stir a fire based on what the story is that you do come through. That you do not abandon, that you do have a plan, Father. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so at one point in my life, I was doing ministry, and I only had a job just so that I could have a flexible schedule to do ministry, and I was a worship leader. And so there was a time in my life where I realized that I wasn't going to be leading worship very long. I stayed at my home church. I did it as long as I could, and I got to a point where I think it was after 10 years of trying to transition my home church, I realized that I grew up there. I'm never going to be selected as the worship pastor, and that I may just be healthier if I were just to resign and let it kind of go on to someone else. So that's how I found myself here at Plum Creek Fellowship. And at that time, I hung up the guitar, and I decided that I was just going to go get a real job and start to build my career. And I had been doing construction, so I went back into construction. And I landed at a place where I was doing waterproofing. And from day one of being hired, I realized I had just walked into a very, very toxic environment. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I'm sure as y'all have gone through your careers that you have that same feeling. And I knew, okay, maybe God put me here because I'm going to step up and we're going to get this thing organized. And I felt that. And for the most part, I became the number one guy's pet. So I had very good organization skills. I went to the top, and everything seemed like it was going in the right direction. But I also noticed that my office had become a counseling room. Everybody came and brought their junk to me about what's going on, and I was talking with them. And I realized who the issue was, and I realized everyone above me is quitting or getting fired. And I kept getting promoted, and I thought, this guy that I'm his right-hand man, if I'm not careful, I'm going to become his enemy. And that's exactly what happened. I became his enemy. I became a threat to him because corporate office came and talked to me one day and said, we want you to take over this division and try to squeeze this guy out. And that was a very, very hard task to do because he already knew it. That's why everyone else was getting canned. And so it was a time where I was really just like praying about how I'm supposed to do this, how is the best way to go about this without looking like a jerk. And then all of a sudden, the man who I was supposed to try to replace let me go, fired me. And I was told that he couldn't do that. So when I was handing my credit card over and everything, I thought this is going to be weird because I'm probably going to walk back in here and get it all back. And then so I called HR and said, hey, this is what's happened. And they said, okay, I'm sorry for your loss. We'll give you a 2-week severance package. And I felt really abandoned. And I was just confused. It's like, why did I just go through this just every day, getting up at 5:30 a.m., getting to the office at 6, to be tormented by this guy? And I was trying to do that because I felt like I'm eventually going to take this division over. And so it felt, in my heart, it felt like just a huge waste of time. And so right the same day on my way home, I figured, well, I'm going to go home early. I might as well start working on the yard just to kind of keep my mind off things. Stopped at Home Depot, ended up meeting another person that I had worked for while I was doing ministry, and he wanted me back in. He said, man, everything you know, let's start our own company. We'll start our own company. And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. I could go I'll put my old company out of business. And I went home and I talked to my wife about that, and I really prayed about it, and I felt in my heart that was not what God wanted me to do. And I already had customers that were finding me on Facebook, like, hey, you're not answering your phone. I want to do this business with you. And so I had this time where I really started praying, and this guy was like, hey, let's get started. The sooner we do this, the sooner that your customers will start coming to you, and we get going. And every time that I talked with him, he convinced me to do the job. But every time I went home and prayed, God was telling me, this is not for you. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do my own thing. So I took one job that the customer really wanted to work with me. I sold him on the product. He said, can you find another sub to do this? And I was able to do that one job. And then I became a handyman, where I was working for myself, and I knew in my heart, I just cannot have a boss for a certain amount of time, because it was so rough on me. So I know I have 10 minutes. He's not getting all those 10 minutes. That's why I'm skipping a lot of stuff, some good, juicy stuff. But there was a time when I finally had to stop receiving phone calls from this gentleman, and just tell him through text message, we cannot talk anymore. I do not want to do this. Sorry about all these things, but I just feel God is telling me to not do this. And I thought in my heart, maybe God wanted me to get out of ministry, go to the corporate world just to see how bad that's going to be, to push me back into ministry. So I thought maybe that's what I'm going to be doing. So our church was doing a couple church plants, one in Kyle and one in Dripping Springs, and I landed a children's ministry job at Dripping Springs, and I told them I'd give them a 2-year commitment. And my wife and I got there. We're super excited, great friendships, lots of great things that were happening there. And the handyman service started taking off. I had old ladies called me all the time. They loved me, and that was my job, go fix door thresholds and different things like that. I had my own schedule, so I could do ministry on the side, and I could do all these things. And so things were very good for me. And I thought that the ministry was going to go and just keep growing, but it wasn't. Well, we learned that when COVID was coming around, I realized this is going to kill this church plant. It's a small plant. They don't have all the funds, and we weren't growing at the rate that we were in the very beginning. So I kind of knew this is not the place for me. And there was a lot of other things that go around it. And so we were waiting to see what COVID was going to do to the church. Because as a children's pastor, and you're not pastoring children, there's really no reason to take an income. So I gave back up my income and said, hey, for now, let's just wait. But at that church and through a bunch of friendships, I ended up meeting another lady, a lady that knew who I was because she was my competition. She was, when I was doing waterproofing, she was the person that was that worked for the owner of another company that she and I have now purchased. And so by meeting her and working with her children, and she said he wants to sell his company, and he wants to sell it to me, but I don't have anybody to run the field. And it looked like, most of our lives, we always kind of look back and see like, that's what you're doing. But it's still rough to go through all that. When you have these expectations, you feel like you pray something, and you really feel like God's telling you to go that way, and then it doesn't pan out. And you just kind of stand there like, what's that about? And now when I look back at it, I thought, if this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have showed up at this church. If I hadn't been at that church, I wouldn't have found out about this church plant and go with this church plant. If I hadn't gone there, I wouldn't have bumped into her to tell me that her boss wants to sell his company. And this opportunity comes up where I can buy this company. And that was happened. We're in our 3rd year after purchasing the company. There's nothing but blessings. Still lots of stress. But as I prayed through all of that time, I did not know where God was taking me. It was a very frustrating time, but I just knew that just keep moving, and through different doors that were opening up. And now when I look back, we have taken our kids out of we've taken them out of school and started homeschooling them. And that opportunity would not have come about if I had not taken on this business. I think that's all I have to say is that my time with God during these years of trying to figure out my career and where I'm supposed to go, I hope relate to y'all in your careers, or you may be in something right now where you're in exactly the same situation. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sitting here because what I look back on, that God wasn't really working on my heart. He was working on this other gentleman's heart of getting out of the business. And I really was like learning about him, and at the time that he said, you know what, after a couple years, I just did not want to do this anymore. But I had built this thing, and so I needed to hand it off to somebody, and I went through a lot of different people, and then all of a sudden you show up, and you're just like me. You're a goofy kid, you can do all these things, and I looked at all the time that I spent learning this trade and doing this thing and having to deal with a toxic environment, learning what's going on, and then come around and purchase a company. That was great. The silver lining to this is I also, through competitive bidding, I put my old business out of business. And that was a little like, yeah. But anyway, thank you, Chad, for letting me share.
All right, thanks, brother. I wanted him to share because I like his response whenever the toxic things happen, whenever the attacks started coming, whenever you're starting to move ahead in obedience to God, when you're trying to do right, when you're trying to make good decisions, you're trying to be wise, and then things just start attacking or things just start falling apart. How do you handle that? Well, y'all ready to dig in tonight? I am. All right, if you did not get a workbook, there's one back there. If you were not here last week, there's some back there. Also, raise your hand if you did not get one of these extra sheets. If you did not get an extra sheet. Can I have somebody volunteer to hand those out? Thank you. There was some extra over here as well. We'll take a look at that here in a minute. So we're looking at Nehemiah. Last week we opened up with this cupbearer to the king of Persia, and he was called out by God to accomplish something incredible. And I hope that you can feel a sense of God calling you out to something. Like God calling Shane out to a certain path, and then things start, it seems like bad things start happening. Have you ever wondered, okay, I'm taking a step in this direction, God, I really believe this is where you are calling me to go, whether it's, maybe for some of us, it's calling us out of a certain sinful lifestyle and into walking in holiness. Or maybe it's calling us into a pressing forward in a certain ministry, not full-time ministry, not necessarily, but whether it's being a better husband, a better dad, a better brother to others, or a certain job, or whatever it is. Have you ever felt that you're starting to take that first step and you're starting to walk down this path and bad things start happening and you start second guessing, oh, well, God, I wonder if this was really your will or not. You ever felt that way? Why is it that we think that when bad things start happening and when we start following in obedience to God, that we're thinking, okay, well, maybe, God, are you sure this was your will? Because we have this flawed mentality of believing that whenever we step out in obedience to God, everything is going to be smooth. Well, that is just the opposite of reality. I want to tell you now, stop thinking that way. Your thinking is upside down, because the enemy begins to attack whenever we begin to take a step in trusting God. Are you seeking to heal your marriage? Has your marriage been on the rocks? And you're going to counseling, you're trying to work things out, and all of a sudden and you're thinking, oh, she's finally wanting to come to counseling. This is great. Well, things are going to be working out. God is going to bless this. And then it's almost like it's harder than it was before, because the enemy hates your marriage. The enemy hates that you're following Jesus. The enemy hates that you're seeking to be obedient to his enemy, which is your father. So he's going to start attacking. Well, what do we do whenever the enemy begins to attack as we brave up and get courageous and we start to follow God? Let's look and see what Nehemiah did. If you remember, we are not studying Nehemiah to become like Nehemiah. Now, don't get me wrong, there are traits and characteristics that we will find in this character, in this person in the Bible, that we can glean from, but we're studying the book of Nehemiah for what reason? To see a pattern of how God deals with his people. So we can learn God, so we can grow closer to God, so we can embrace more of who God is. Sometimes it's difficult to follow somebody that you don't really know very well. Well, we have been taught that God is trustworthy. Well, let's look and see, why did Nehemiah see God as so trustworthy? Why did he embrace, so fiercely trusted God even when the enemy started attacking? All right, so we're in session 2. The enemy attacks when we trust in God. Let's set the stage a little bit. We're picking up where we left off last week. Chapter 2, verse 9, Nehemiah writes, "Then I went to the governors in the region beyond the river. They gave them the king's letters." Because remember, he has been given permission by King Artaxerxes to go. He's made this plan. He mourned before God. He spent months praying and planning out with wisdom on what to do, and he had all of this planned out. He couldn't have planned all of this out with wisdom if he was overtaken with anger and fear. So he rejected anger and fear and humbled himself before God. God, I know that your promises, I know your plan, put me in the game. I want to follow your will. I want to go and rebuild this wall. So the king gave him letters to give to the governors, to let them pass through, to give them supplies and all that kind of stuff. Middle of verse 9. "Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me." Oh, so he's got an entourage. He's got security. Verse 10. "When Sanballat, bum, 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 the Horonite, and Tobiah, bum, bum, bum," these are bad guys, "the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed." You ever been deeply disturbed? What is deeply disturbed? What does that look like? You ever met someone who just seemed always deeply disturbed? These guys were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. Now you need to understand, Sanballat was, and we learned this from extra biblical literature, that Sanballat was the governor of Samaria. Samaria had voluntarily, so good of them, taken control of Judah. So whenever they found out that somebody's coming in to start rebuilding the walls, well, we don't like that very well. So they were deeply disturbed. Nehemiah was about to complete a task that others had not been able to do for 100 years. This was an incredible task of rebuilding these walls. Verse 11, "So I came to Jerusalem, and I was there," how many days? 3 days. "Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode." So Nehemiah was there 3 days, and he didn't jump in and go, "All right, guys, here's what we're going to do. All right, you're going to follow me, and we're going to start laying bricks, and we're going to put limestone down and mortar down and start building, put the cedar wood. I got all these people with me. Look, here's a letter from the king, and see the army and everything. We're going to do this. All right, here we go." If you tried that, what do you think they would say? I'm sorry, who are you? You've been living in luxury in the palace for all these years, and you come here and tell us what we're going to do? No, he spent 3 days. I wonder what he was doing for those 3 days. I would like to offer my opinion, right or wrong, but I really believe that Nehemiah spent time with people in Judah for 3 days, because there was no way he would have gotten the following if people didn't trust him. And there was no way that people would trust him if they didn't know him. See, this is one of the reasons why I am impressed from the very beginning when I started to come here with Fellowship Church, because they hire, as best they can, they hire from within. As best as they can, they hire from within. I always thought it was, and I grew up in church. I'm a pastor's kid, and that's, except for 4 years in sales, that's all I've done. I left ministry to find out how bad the corporate world was, and thank God for people like Chris and Paul who encouraged me, come back in. But I always thought it was, what word should I use? That I always questioned why churches would go through this entire thorough process of nominating elders in a church. But then we get a resume from a senior pastor. We have no idea who he is. We come in and call 3 references. He brings his A game of a sermon one Sunday, and we vote on him. That's just, I've always questioned that. But see, what y'all did here is y'all had Chris Smith, who had been here for years. Y'all knew him, y'all loved him, you seen him on his worst days, you see him on his bad days, you know what you're getting. I think this is why I think this makes sense to me. Nehemiah spent 3 whole days, I believe, I'm really convinced, and there's scholars that have written about this as well, spending time with the people before he gave his whole charge of what he's going to do. So 3 days, and then verse 13, look at verse 13. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuse gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were burned with fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, and there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. In other words, the destruction was horrendous. Remember how I told you last week when that hurricane hit Camp Pearl, where my dad worked, and it was just, my heart just sunk when I saw that. I can imagine Nehemiah empathizing with the people in Judah, probably about 50,000 of them, who were just, their hearts were just caved in, and their lives were just miserable. There's no way, we can't rebuild this. We don't even have the materials, we don't have the motivation, we don't have the leadership, and because the destruction was horrendous. So I went up, verse 14, in the night by the valley and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work, the others who eventually did the work. He had told none of the leadership that they had in the place in Judah the reason why he was there. So he spent all of this time inspecting. He spent all this time doing his homework, doing his research. I can imagine if he didn't, and if he would just first, day one shows up and he gives I've been practicing this great motivational speech. Remember Independence Day, the motivational speech on Independence Day? What was that, 20-something years ago? Some of y'all weren't born yet. We're fighting against the annihilation of humankind, and all the countries of the world came together and beat all the bad aliens, Or Braveheart. Remember Braveheart back in the day? Mel Gibson. What was his famous line in his motivational speech? Remember? Freedom. They can't take our freedom. I was jumped up, standing. Yeah. My wife walks in. What's wrong? It's like nothing. It's just a movie. Sorry. Sit back down. Motivational. I wondered if Nehemiah practiced his great motivational speech. I'm ready to give them the charge. We're going to rebuild these walls. Nehemiah, have you seen the wall? Well, no, but wait. You haven't even seen the wall and you're going to tell us that we're going to rebuild it. No, he didn't do that. He went and he did his homework. He did his homework. See, first of all, anger and fear would never have gotten him there at the beginning. He would have never have gotten there. And a man who lacked wisdom would not do his homework and spend time researching the problem. So he mourned the problem, he brought it to God, that's last week. Now he's taking a step in the direction of fulfilling God's plan for his nation in rebuilding the walls. The temple was already built, but now he's rebuilding the wall to protect the nation that God had chosen for eventually the Messiah to be born in, to save mankind. Do you think these walls were important? Yes, they were important. You think God wanted these walls built? Yes, God wanted these walls built. It was part of his ultimate plan, and Nehemiah knew that. So there was promises of God that he decided to stand on despite what was about to happen. All right. Let's look at problem number 1, the attack from the enemy. Well, here's verse 17, and you get into his motivational speech. Then I said to them, you know who them? Who is them? Referring to the verse right before that. The Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and everybody else who was going to do the work. I said to them, you see the distress that we, so he officially made himself part of them. You see the distress that we are in. That distress goes all the way back to chapter 1, verse 3. Chapter 1, verse 3, when he was in the palace and his brothers came in and they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. You see, in other words, Nehemiah is saying, I see your problem and I identify, I am part of it, I am in this, I am affected with this by you. I am part of this. He is not talking from down to them from a distance. I see your problem. He goes, I see the problem that we are in. How Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. And then he says, come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So Nehemiah, I don't know what the guy looked like. This picture up there, I stole it off of, I'm probably going to get in trouble for it. There's probably some kind of a tracker on there. I don't even remember where I got this picture from. I have no idea what Nehemiah looked like. I imagine he was probably dressed rather well, because he lived in the palace for many, many years. He probably ate well. I don't know if he was fit or fat or what. But apparently he had some leadership skills that were worthy of following. In fact, that's why I gave you this sheet, and I want you to look this on your own. This is from Donald Campbell. Wrote a book, Nehemiah, Man in Charge. These are effective leadership skills from his book, Nehemiah, Man in Charge. You can read this later on your own, especially in your fasting time, those 19 of you. And if you didn't sign up for the fast, by the way, Perseverance Event Challenge Fast, you can still do that. You can still take part in it. But this is something that you can pray through and work through as well. But he didn't talk himself up with the people. He didn't say, you need to look at me. I want to tell you my credentials. I want to tell you my abilities. Here's my resume. He didn't build himself up. You know who he built up? He says, I got to tell you, God's hand is on me. Because God is doing something. Now, he is saying, follow me, but he's saying, follow me because I'm following God. So he built up God. He's putting God on the display where God belongs, not himself. That is his pattern that we keep seeing over and over again. So he says, come, let us build a wall in Jerusalem that we no longer be approached. Oh, and then middle of verse 19, so they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to do this good work. Or literally, they strengthened their hands to do this good work. So they decided, okay, Nehemiah, we hear you, we see, we know you're a part of us, we know that you're Hebrew, we know where you've been, but we know that you're a part of us. We see that God's hand is upon you because no single Hebrew man could get all of these letters and this great army from Persia to come with you and follow your command, a Persian army following the command of a Hebrew, obviously God's hand is upon you. And so they decided collectively, well, you'll see later, about 99% of them decided, we will rise up and we will build with you. Let us do this. And so they strengthened their hands toward this great work. There was unity. There was motivation. God, we're going to follow you. We are expecting God to do great things. And then the very next verse starts with but. And I hate when that happens in my life. Don't you? We're going to do this. We're going to heal our marriage. Our kids are going to grow and be like Jesus. I'm going to get this new job, or I'm going to start this new job. Shane says, I'm going to get out of toxicity, and I'm going to jump in full-fledged with this new job. And I'm sure everything with this new Waterloo has been smooth and great and no problems. No, it seems like that when we take that first step in righteousness, there is always that but. But then this happens. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and then Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? Well, I wonder how Nehemiah answered them. So specifically what he's doing is he is spewing mockery and ridicule. This is hatred coming out of his mouth. In Nehemiah's response, so I answered them and I said, how dare you speak to me that way? Don't you know who I am? I've been in the king's service for many, many years. I'm going to tell him you're doing this. You know, he's over you. I don't care who you think you are. You want some of this? No. He didn't go, all right, army, go get them. We're just nipping it in the bud right now. Just take care of them all. Annihilate them. No, he didn't do that either. In fact, he doesn't even seem that he got angry. It's almost like he looked at Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem as puny gods. What movie was that from? Come on. Yeah, it was an Avengers movie. He answered, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build, and you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. Nehemiah held that perspective. It didn't shake his faith. He didn't get weak in the knees and go, oh no, God, are you sure this is what I'm supposed to do? Because, they're laughing at us. When they're calling us names. No. He relied, here's what you write in your workbooks. Nehemiah, his response in 2:20, Nehemiah relied on the faithfulness of God and the truth of the matter. On the faithfulness of God and the truth of the matter. Nehemiah, you can almost say that Nehemiah evangelized to his own enemies whenever they were mocking him. No, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. I wonder if at the very end, in fact, I wonder not. I know at the very end that Sanballat and Tobiah and the enemies, they remembered Nehemiah, the very first thing, that God himself will prosper us, and you have no memorial here. You have no jurisdiction here. This does not belong to you. And he went on about his work. So Nehemiah didn't get defensive. He wasn't self-seeking. He didn't lose his temper. But he went to God because he knows that God is able. So their dependence was not on their abilities, on their human resources, on their strength, or on their genius. They realized that their only hope is in the God of heaven. All right, then he goes through chapter 3, and we're not going to read all through chapter 3, but he goes through chapter 3, and it's amazing this organizational effort that Nehemiah showed here, because when you read through this chapter on your own, when you read through this chapter, he says after that or next to 28 times. So when you think about this great wall that was supposed to go around Jerusalem, all of that, he positioned specific people in strategic locations for logical reasons all around. I want you here. Well, I want to go here. Nope. I want you here because of this. And it's interesting because he put many of the families to work on the section of the wall that was nearest to their home. Why do you think he would do that? To build up the motivation for them to work on that part of the wall, because that's where they live. So he strategically placed them for logical reasons. The organization here is incredible. Now let's turn over to chapter 4, verse 1. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. This is when hate spewed out of his mouth. He spewed hatred and attacked their abilities. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?" You know what you do when you burn limestone? I had a fire ring of limestone in my backyard in Houston for a little while. It didn't last very long because I had it too close to the fire. The fire got hot and the limestone cracked. That's what happened. So everything was just cracking and crumbling and falling. They're thinking, are they going to rebuild all of this? So what are they attacking? You ever felt personally attacked? Shane, were you ever personally attacked in that toxic place that you were working in? Every day. So, yeah. You ever listened to those attacks and then you start thinking, maybe I am worthless. Maybe I am inadequate. Maybe I am insignificant. Has your spouse verbally attacked you? Your kids? You ever gotten a political debate on Facebook? You know you've been attacked then. Don't do that. Those are stupid. In other words, what the enemy is trying to do to Nehemiah and the people of Judah was for them to give up. Tell them that they are too messed up to do right. Just give it all up. I used to be a man that was, and I still battle it sometimes. We all do. But fear, shame, and guilt, I know those three villains very, very well. You know, fear tells you you're going to die if you try. I'll see to it. So you might as well just give up. And shame says, I know what you did. You're worthless. You're not valued. No one here likes you. You heard of imposter syndrome? I don't belong here. When I went into sales, all I knew was theology and working in church. And I went into sales. I'll tell you my story later. But I went into sales, and I had to act like I know what I was doing because I didn't. And I've had that imposter syndrome. I had to pretend. I put this facade of yeah, I know what I'm doing here, just like y'all do. What's the jargon again, so I can learn that? And you don't feel valued. Some of you probably work in the same place for a long time, and you still have that feeling. Shame. And then there's guilt. You know what you did last night. You know what you did before you got here. You know those thoughts that's been in your mind. You know what you've been looking at. The guilt. See, fear says you'll die if you try, so you might as well give up. Shame says you're too worthless, so you might as well give up. Guilt says you're too dirty, you might as well give up. But God says, that's why I sent my son. I sent my son to take your shame, to take your guilt, and to conquer your fear. You have to decide, what are you going to tell yourself? Those lies or the truth? You need to stop telling yourself those lies and start listening to the truth of the voice of Jesus. The voice that God is telling, has promised Nehemiah. So they spewed, look in your workbooks, they spewed hatred and attacked their abilities. But in verse, I didn't finish, did I? Let's see, verse 3. Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him. Tobiah is like some stupid sidekick. And he said, whatever they build, even if a fox goes on, it's going to break down their stone wall. That's what the kind of picture I have in my mind with Tobiah. But here is his response. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders. So here is his response. Look in attack number 2. They spewed hatred and attacked their abilities. Nehemiah's response is he responded in prayer. Again, who is Nehemiah in awe of? Is he in fear of the enemy, or is he in awe of God? I believe Nehemiah is looking at the enemy as puny little people, because his view of God is so great. So he responded in prayer. Number 1, he was honest. He said, God, we're being despised. Be honest with God. God, here's what's happening. This place is toxic. Here is what they're saying. Here is what I'm telling myself. Because sometimes we are our worst enemy. Here's the lies I'm hearing. He was honest with God. Number 2, he realized it was God being attacked. Look at the end of verse 5. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders. They provoked God to anger. They're opposing God. See, Nehemiah is not seeing, oh no, look what they're doing to me. They're saying, God, this is what they're doing to you. See, a person who perseveres is someone who views God as the one that's being attacked. If you are following God in obedience and being attacked and trying to persevere. The society that is rising up today is full of victims. We got victims everywhere. You don't have to say much and somebody's going to be offended. Oh, me. Woe is me. Look what you're doing. Look what they did to me. What about my rights? I wonder what rights did Nehemiah claim to have? He claimed to have one right. He was a servant of God. And if he is attacked for it, he doesn't feel like he's being attacked. God, they're attacking you. Why can't we have that same mentality, that same thinking, that same motivation, that if we are following God in obedience and we're being attacked for it, God, look what they're doing to you. Wow. Well, I'll let you deal with them. So he viewed it as God being attacked. Number 3, he prayed God's promises. He prayed God's promises. He prayed... turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. This is why I say, let's not look at Nehemiah and be like him. It's not that we should call down God to rain fire and destroy all of our enemies. The specific promises that Nehemiah was recalling. See, we live under what's called the age of grace. Jesus has come. We're not living under the Mosaic law like Nehemiah was. We're living under the age of grace. It's something different. Okay? The law, God gave the law to Moses. He gave a promise to Abraham and expanded on it in the law through Moses. That promise, all the way back in Genesis 3, was to Abraham, and Nehemiah was living under this promise, was that I will bless those who bless you, Abraham and his nation, and I will curse those who curse you. So God made a promise to Israel. This is not a promise to America. Do not make the mistake of taking God's promises to the nation of Israel and thinking those are the same promises to the United States of America. They're not. Or to the Christian world, all the Christians in the world. They're not. We got to be real about Scripture. These are promises made to the nation of Israel. So Nehemiah is recalling and praying for God's promises to be fulfilled. God, you said that you would bless those who bless us, and you would curse those who curse us. We are being cursed. They are provoking you to anger. I am praying that you will fulfill your promises on them. What promises can we pray for God to fulfill in our situations today? Are there any? Are there any? Do we know? Do we know any promises that God makes to us when we feel attacked? There's one. Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Yeah? I will never leave you. I'm there. I'm here right with you. I'm not going to leave you in this situation. What else? Same thing. Great minds think alike. Blessed are those who persecute you. Jesus says, I'm going to bless you when you're being persecuted for my name's sake. These are promises. Guys, I got to tell you, there's a whole lot more in the New Testament. A whole lot more. Read it. Read this. This is for you. You're in this. You're part of this. And there's promises that God makes to us. So if you want to persevere, your choice. If you want to persevere, you can try and play the victim and go, I can't believe this is happening, and start going to talk to everybody. You know what they're doing to me? You know what? I'm trying to do my very best for God, and this is happening, and I'm sorry, I just need to vent. I do that. Ask Troy. We go to workout every morning, and we vent with each other. And then we go, but I know God's got this, don't we? But Nehemiah prayed God's promises. And the last thing there is he recognized that vengeance belongs to God. Vengeance belongs to God. You know, and this is very anti-Hollywood, very anti the man's position. You know, vengeance. We're going to seek vengeance on our enemies, and we're going to go out and kill them all. And that's what makes money. That's what makes movies. But if vengeance belongs to God, and we try and take something that belongs to God and put it on us, don't you think it's going to be a little heavy? Now, vengeance belongs to God, and Nehemiah was resting in that promise and that truth that vengeance belongs to God. So then, therefore, he went back to work. He just went back to work. Well, look at verse 7. Well, verse 6 says, so we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. I love that. The people had a mind to work. We'll go back to that in a little bit. Verse 7. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became what? What does your version say? Mine says very angry. Man, this is getting worse. I mean, they were in distress. They were very upset. They didn't like it at all, and then they got very indignant, furious, and very indignant, and then they just became very angry. They're just not happy people, these poor folks. And all of them conspired together. So you got Sanballat and his army, you got Tobiah and his people, you got all the Arabs, the people of Ammon, and the people of Ashdod. All of them. This coalition conspiring together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. So now, first, they just began spewing mockery and ridicule, laughing at them, calling them names. Then they spewed hatred and attacked their abilities, their personhood. And then that didn't work. Nehemiah went back to work, and they started to say, all right, well, then we're going to come and take you down physically. Physical harm. Verse 9, nevertheless, we made our prayer to God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. So they responded in prayer. There's your note. And responded in prayer to God for strength to press on. So that was problem one, the attack from the enemy. Now let's jump to problem two. Look at verse 10. Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing. Judah, meaning all the people, are coming to him with this message. Nehemiah, the strength of the laborers are failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build it. We can't do it. And our adversary says they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them all and cause the work to cease. So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. So their strength was failing. The enemy continued their threats, and the nearby Jews urged them to quit. These were Jews that dwelt near the town. So they were tired, they were exhausted, they were still being threatened. And then their own people were saying, you guys aren't going to do this, just quit, just give up. I mean, talk about the wind out of our sails. I mean, it's just one problem after another. How would you respond if you were Nehemiah at this point? Be honest, come on. I mean, seriously. I thought, oh, okay, God, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I think you need to send somebody else. I'm not good enough for this. There was another character in the Bible who responded like that. He was afraid. So God, I got a speech problem. You need to send somebody else. You know, I'm not cut out for this. My brother, send my brother Aaron. Let him do it. The guy who went to Nineveh got swallowed by a whale. God, I don't want to do this. This is not me. I'm not cut out for this. Those guys are saying that God is not good enough to work through them to accomplish His plan. Are we actually going to give that message to our families, to our children, to the people that we work with? That God is not good enough to accomplish even a difficult task through us? That we're quitters? Wow, man, that convicts me personally. That hits me down here. Well, let's look at verse 13. Look at Nehemiah's response. Therefore, I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and the leaders and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren and to your sons and your daughters and your wives and your houses. And it happened when our enemies heard that it was known to us that God had brought their counsel to nothing, that all of us returned to the wall, everyone to his own work. I mean, sometimes we do that. We think the problem is going to be a whole lot worse than it actually is. And I see here that God is so powerful that if we trust Him, instead of seeing how bad the problem is and continuing stepping through this storm, knowing that God is with us, He's not going to forsake us, the enemy's going to go, wow, I don't know what else to do, guys. I guess we can't defeat this guy. It gets better. Look at verse 16. So it was from that time on that half my servants worked at construction, while the other half held spears, the shields, the bows, and wore armor, and the leaders were behind all the house of Judah. And those who built on the wall, those who carried burdens, loaded themselves. So this is my favorite part. Those who loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked on the construction and the other hand they held a weapon. It got that tight. It got that bad that they are saying we are not giving in to the enemy. We are trusting God through this marriage problem. We are trusting God through this kid issue that we don't know how to deal with. We're trusting God through whatever it is that the enemy is trying to attack. They had one hand, they had a hammer working on the wall, while the other hand they got their sword. Banging on the wall, fixing the wall, looking around with the sword. I mean, Have we gotten that detailed on our persevering? Have we trusted God that fiercely? Is God worth that kind of trust? Would God allow people, his own children, to get to that point? Apparently he will. You know, there's a verse in 1 Corinthians that is often misinterpreted. I've heard people say to me, you know, we had a daughter die of cancer. And our people say to me, hey, Chad, you know, God gave you this problem because he knew that you were strong enough to handle it. Like, what? You don't know me. I mean, I'm wrecked with anxiety and depression. I should have killed myself a long time ago. It was bad. You don't know me. And for you to even say that, well, you know that verse that God will never give you something you can't handle, right? And isn't that in the Bible? God promises, I'll never give you something that you can't handle. Nope, not in the Bible. Not anywhere in the Bible. Look, all 66 books, it ain't there. There's a verse that sounds like in 1 Corinthians, I'm going to get 10:31 or 10:13. It just where God is not going to allow you to go through a temptation beyond what you may handle, but He always provide a way of escape. That's tempting to sin. That's temptation to sin. But will God allow you to go through something so painful that you can't handle? You bet He will. Because you can't handle it. You can't handle the enemy's attacks. I'm telling you right now, you can't handle the enemy's attacks. And that's the point. Because He can. If we can handle it, we don't need God. Or maybe even more than that, we are God. But we can't. So don't ever think that you're stepping into obedience is wrong if you're being attacked. Because when we're attacked, we are looking to see God work on our behalf like He promises to. See, Christian men persevere when you think that way. That's the way Christian men are supposed to persevere. That's the way we're supposed to think. So Nehemiah's response, number one, on bottom page 8, is immediate action. There was immediate action, all right? Okay, I hear you. I hear you. You're tired. The enemies are still threatening. I understand. Other Jews are telling you. I get it. Okay, Nehemiah, what are we going to do? All right, you're going to do this. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. We're taking immediate action. We're going to keep doing this. We're not giving up. We're following the process. We're not changing course. There's no reason why we should change course. God didn't tell us to change course. There's immediate action because God called us to this. If God called you to be a godly husband, then take action and be the godly husband that He called you to be. Nehemiah's response number 2 in verse 14 was to inspire. He inspired them. Verse 14, don't be afraid. See, your family, your church, your community, the world that you live in needs somebody to step up and say, hey, it's going to be okay. God's got this. Let's go. Let's don't stop. Let's don't give up. It's going to be okay. I know you're scared. I am too. But we have every reason to be courageous in this. It's going to be okay. Let's not give up. The world needs somebody like that. You think we're going to look for a president to be that way? Are you looking for a politician to finally do that? Some kind of a government official? No. You do it. You do it. You rise up and be that leader. You be that man of God that fiercely trusts God. Hey, it's okay. We're being attacked. It's okay. We're going to be all right. God's here. He's got this. Inspire. Inspire because God is worthy of our obedience. And then number 3, He tightened the plan because God strengthens us to persevere. Let's look at some of these practical points. And we're going to divide into groups for a few minutes. These practical points. I love that verse in 2:18 and in 4:6. They had a mind to work. They put their minds to work. Here's what that does not look like. It does not look like, okay, we'll go this way, but I got to make sure I got a way out. What about, no. They put their mind to work. We're going to work on this wall. I'm not even looking back behind me. If God called you to it, then go do it. You plus faith in God equals extraordinary. Attack from all sides did not thwart the plan. 2 Corinthians 4, 6 through 11. Flip over there real quick. 2 Corinthians 4. Six through 11. Oh, this is good. So this is Paul, and he's been through a lot. 6 through 11, 2 Corinthians 4, 6 through 11 says, For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. Paul's motivation was to put Jesus on display wherever he is. What's yours? And then verse 8, we are hard-pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. For we who live are always delivered to death for Jesus' sake, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. I think one of the best ways to tell people about Jesus is for people to watch you persevere. And people come to you and say, it hasn't happened often, but I have had just a small number of times someone come to me literally and saying, how do you do it? How do you do it? You had a child die. That's like the parent's worst nightmare, isn't it? Yeah. How do you do it? Well, his name is Jesus. He's not giving up. Why should I? His grace is truly that magnificent. And you can have that same hope and that same grace as well. Nehemiah identified the problem and responded with wisdom. We can't respond with wisdom if we're overcome by anger and fear. We got to reject that, guys. Number 4, things usually aren't as bad as they initially seem to be. We talked about it in verse 15. Remember, whenever the enemy saw that heard that was known to us that God had brought their counsel to nothing, but we just went back to work. But that's true. Things are usually not as bad as they initially seem to be. Anxiety tells you, fear tells you it's going to be bad. I'm telling you, you're going to die. If you try to just give up, it's going to be bad. I used to tell myself that when my daughter was sick with cancer. She's going to die and your family's going to be destroyed. You're going to fall apart. It's going to be horrible. You might as well just drink. A couple of times I did. It didn't help. It got worse. You might as well just give up. But it was a lie. Even the death of a child cannot overcome the grace of Jesus. And I'm telling you, whatever problem you're going through, whatever problem you face, and if you aren't being attacked, I guarantee you 100% you will. 100% it's going to happen. It may not happen tomorrow, it may happen in the next decade, but it will. And whatever it is, it doesn't matter how big it is, it will never be able to overcome the grace of Jesus. Things are never as bad as what they seem to be. Hey, it's going to be okay. Keep going. Don't give up. Number 5, there is never a reason to give up hope when God is present. Do you believe that? Number 6, inspire others to do the God-given impossible feat. See, I've realized that I married a very godly woman. Melissa is very godly, and I'm so blessed to have her as a wife. But she needs to hear me say things like, we are not going to give up hope because God's got this. And sometimes she tells me, she reminds me, hey, we are a church that have problems. We have problems in our church, okay? You know why? Because you're here. And I'm here. We have problems here because people are here. And sometimes problems get a little out of hand and fires blow up and things just, I don't know where we're going to, and they need men like you to stand up and go, hey, there's no reason not to trust in God on this. There's no reason not to give up hope when God is present, and He is always present. Some of you, even in the midst of your storm, you need to stand up and inspire somebody else. Hey, God's got this. Let's don't give up hope. Number 7, now listen to this very carefully. If it is God who called you to the task, then the critics are only there to build your resolve to obey God. If you are following God in obedience and it's getting really, really heavy and really difficult, and the critics are throwing things at you left and right, let them be a sign that your obedience to God is really that strong. They're just building your resolve to obey God. In chapter 3, verse 5, it mentions that some did not rise up and want to build. So you're going to have somebody that's not going to get on board and follow your lead to obey God. So get over it. You don't need 100% of people to follow you. Follow God anyway. Number 9, the last one. The object of our faith is our God. Zechariah 4:6, without turning there, it is a promise. It says that Zechariah was a prophet, and what was told to him, the word of the Lord, is not by might nor by power, but you finish it. You know it? But by my Spirit, says the Lord. The object of our faith is not in our abilities. The object of our faith should never be in our faith. The object of our faith is always God. So when you're being attacked, and it's going to happen, who are you going to put up on display? Yourself or God? Are you going to hide and run? Or are you going to stand up and say, God's got this? Are you going to be the leader that stands up and inspires others to follow and trust God fiercely? Because somebody needs to hear that, because that is where hope is. All right. Last week, we finished off with a question and answer and stuff like that. This time, we're going to spend about 35 minutes or so in small groups. So if you are a small group leader, if your name is Larry Castro, Chris Cherry, Yasha Wood, Tom Hannon, Jeff Garza, or Michael Schultz, would you spread yourself? Actually, so Michael, you're at a table. You know what? Let's do it this way. If you're one of the small leaders, come spread yourself out here and grab a table that's spread out, okay? And I want us in the next 5 minutes, to go grab one of these guys, and you're going to be in their small group for the next 4 nights, okay? So we have Chris Cherry is going to be over here in this corner. Tom, raise your hand. So if you want to be in Chris's group, and I may move you because we want it to be equal. When I count to 3, I want you to get up and go to a group. Chris is over here. Chris, raise your hand. Chris is shaking hands. Tom is over here. Yasha is over here. Larry, where's Larry? Larry is right here. If you want to be in Larry's group, go over there. Jeff Garza is over there. And Michael Schultz is over there. All right, did I get everybody? Okay, get up and go pick one of those. Let's go. And if I see it top heavy on one side, then I'll start moving people. And this will be your group for the remainder of the summer. Y'all can put tables together if you'd like to. If you need to do that, do that. We need a couple, 3 people over here at Tom's group. There we go. This group's looking good. This group can use some. Michael's group can use a couple more. Michael in the green shirt over there. Feel free to pull another table together if you need to, guys.